Hi everyone. In this video, I'm going to discuss some trends that have resulted from the COVID epidemic that has spread around the world. And the purpose of this recording and what we're going to go over is simply to demonstrate that, among other things, this has not been just one epidemic that we have experienced here in the United States, but instead it's occurred all over the world in different timing. So while we were having our epidemic and still are, other countries may not have. On the other hand, while our epidemic has calmed down, it's just taking off. Pardon me, I've got something stuck in my throat, but it's just taking off in other parts of the country, of the world rather. So what we want to do is just try to appreciate what the impacts of the coronavirus have been economically, and then to take a look at how the epidemic or epidemics have spread around the world so that we can make a guess as to where it's most likely to cause economic or social damage, both currently and perhaps in the future. So with that, let me see if I can bring up some slides that will help us discuss the economic impacts of COVID. Now, I do have some difficulty with making this system work, so please bear with me. Well, what do you know? It worked. Okay, so we're just going to take a look now at 10 selected countries and see if we can find any similarities or differences. Here is and all these charts are going to be the very same with regard to the time covered, that is from 2010 to the International Monetary Fund's forecast for 2026. The graph on the right demonstrates the growth rates from year to year in real GDP. Now, these charts are done in the country's own currency because, frankly, that's the way the International Monetary Fund presented them. So I had to take what we got. As you know, I would much prefer to see these data in purchasing power parity. But I think that since inflation has been taken out and we have so-called real GDP, that we should get a pretty good message and be able to compare countries with these data. So no surprise, the US suffered a decline in 2020, and the GDP dropped, the real GDP dropped about 3.5%. And we're hopeful that here in 21 we'll essentially get back to where we were at the end of 2019. That is, among other things, you can see what a rapid growth rate the IMF expects. And that's because the US government has poured virtually trillions of dollars. If all the programs are launched that are proposed here, we'll get up to something like $6 trillion. That's quite a growth rate on a GDP that was about 20 trillion. So we're talking about some major fiscal and monetary stimulus, which presents its own problems after things quiet down, and not least of which is the expectation for higher inflation, which we see today. Okay, enough of that. Here's the United Kingdom. And bear in mind, the United Kingdom includes not just England, but also Scotland, Wales, Ireland, and so it's you know, the United Kingdom is more than just England. If we just had England here, the dip would be steeper still. And yet you can see that last year, England, the UK's economy dropped, the real economy dropped 10%. Now I've rounded it off. It might be 9.8% or something like that, but all these numbers have been rounded off, I think, except one, which was 0.5, so I called it a half. Anyway, this is a really steep decline, and the UK is not going to get out of it. First of all, they're in the middle of a new surge that we will see later on in some slides. But here we are where the cursor is in 2021, and you see it's far below where it left off in 2019, and it'll only be up here in 2022 that the UK regains the size of economy that it left off with in 2019. So this has been a major, major event. And some interesting news is that the variant, the Delta variant, is very active in England, and now it has migrated to the United States. I'll be talking about some of those trends that in a subsequent video, where we'll be talking about the coronavirus itself and what its impacts on companies and consumers and so forth will be. But you can see here, this is a mighty big drop. And the UK has announced that it's going to take some serious action to recover. Whether that action is successful and or whether another surge of coronavirus should occur in England and some other European countries remains an open question. Now, you want to see a chart that looks very similar to this one? Here's Argentina. Look at that drop, 10%. However, Argentina was having some difficulty all the way back in 2019. And we can see when we look at the growth rate charts that Argentina's economy has been spotty ever since 2012. There are a variety of reasons for this that I don't have time to get into right now, but you can see that the 2 years prior to 2020 also were declines. So when the coronavirus hit Argentina, the damage was devastating, and the likelihood that Argentina will regain where it left off back in 2017 probably won't be until 2026, 5 years from now. So Argentina's situation, its economic situation, is pretty dire, and it's the effects both of economic distress that has occurred in this largely agricultural economy that has had some serious political issues, as well as the coronavirus. So here we are in Brazil, another South American country. And you can see that the IMF projects a decline due to the coronavirus in 2020 of just about 4%. You can see it over here. However, notice that there have been comparable declines in prior years. So what's going on in Brazil? Once again, the answer is it would take a very long time to share. But there have been virtually 3 presidents of Brazil in 4 or 5 years. And there's a new election coming up where Mr. Bolsonaro is probably going to be voted out of office. So Brazil's problems are political. And you can see that its economy was much larger back in 2014 than it was in 2019, 5 years later. And so when the coronavirus hit, a reduction of 4% is what's reported by IMF. Now, IMF gets its data from the country, of course, and there is a question as to just how accurate Brazil's numbers are. And we will see that kind of problem as we go through the rest of these charts on occasion. Note that Brazil promises some very rapid growth in the forthcoming years. And again, you've got to ask yourself, can that really happen? Now, oil has been discovered off the coast of Brazil. It's very deep and hard to recover, but Brazil does have a pretty substantial industrial economy. It has a fairly well-known aircraft manufacturing company called Embraer. It has quite a lot of food processing and packaging companies, and it has an industrial economy. So it's possible for Brazil to shake off this problem, sort of like the US is promising to do. But it's got, and the US, like Brazil, has its political problems lately, but Brazil's are probably a little more influential than those in the United States. But both countries have their political problems. Here is India, and India is another one of those countries where the growth rates and the economic data are not reliable. It's frankly even been acknowledged by India's government that its economic data collection prior to the current administration was completely unreliable. How good these data are then is open to question. But you can see that India has suffered an 8% decline in its real GDP, if you believe their numbers. When we get to other graphs that we'll look at after we're done with these economic graphs, we'll see that India has really had a major impact from the coronavirus. So, and of course, the decline here in India is largely due to the coronavirus. You can see there was a decline that started in 2019, but by and large, what we see is this, the impact of the coronavirus. Now, India has been historically a rapidly growing economy. And and you can see the growth rates here, some well over 5%. So, and that's a lot faster than the US historically has enjoyed, for instance. And yet what we see here is an anticipation of 12.5% growth in the current year. We'll see if that's true, but it certainly is possible. On the other hand, again, in another video, I'm going to show you some of the domestic impacts of coronavirus in India, which make us wonder whether that kind of growth really can be achieved. Here's Japan. You may be wondering when you look at this chart, this dip looks just as big and bad as the one in Argentina, but Argentina's growth or decline was 10%, and this one's only 5%. Why is that? It doesn't look right. And then you look at the chart, the growth rate chart, and you see that 1% has been a pretty fast growth rate for Japan, and in about half of the most recent years, it didn't achieve it. Japan's is a very mature economy. It has more senior citizens than any other major country, and the economy actually is declining over a long-term basis. So compared to growth rates of 0.75% or 0.5%, or this one's 0.33%, a drop of 5% is a big drop. And that's why this chart looks so dramatic. You can see that here in 2022, Japan will not have achieved the level that it was at in 2019. That'll come in 2023. So nevertheless, Japan, like the United States, has done a lot of stimulus or used and invoked a number of fiscal stimuli and monetary stimuli to get the economy growing. That economy has enough practice, and it is orderly enough that this forecast is probably believable. Here's Russia, and Russia is a very special case. First of all, once again, we wonder whether 3% is all that has happened in Russia, but it's very possible. Russian cities are spread out from each other. And the people and the societies within Russia don't commingle very much. I remember traveling from Moscow to St. Petersburg, and there's a lot of trees in between. Or going east from Moscow to Wuhan. I'm sorry, not Wuhan. It's a big industrial city that I visited. Oh well. Anyway, the fact is that these cities are pretty well spread between themselves. So it is possible that you know, Russia has done its own version of social distancing. And I wish I could remember the name of that city because I spent some time in it. Anyway, but what's been going on down here? And the answer is that oil prices dropped. If you remember, the prices of oil really cratered around the world as well as the United States. And Russia's economy is heavily dependent upon the petroleum industry. It provides petroleum that it obtains in Ukraine as well as its own lands to most of Europe. So when economies economies are growing and demand lots of gasoline and oil, then Russia's economy grows. But when economies stumble, as was the case with the coronavirus, then the demand for petroleum is reduced, as well as the overall level of economic activity. But you can see back here in 2015 and 16, this drop that occurred. And then in 2020, Russia got hit again, but not as severely. And as the European economy recovers, the IMF projects that Russia's economy will recover as well. Okay, here's another country and that looks a lot like Russia, and it's Nigeria. And Nigeria, like Russia, is a major supplier of oil and petroleum products. And so it had the same experience that Russia did. And here we have a real question of reliability of the data. Did Nigeria's economy drop by less than 2% in 2020 when healthcare facilities and availability of vaccines were both fairly meager? I suspect that this is an understatement, but because Nigeria does have a petroleum industry, it will behave very similarly to Russia. Okay, let's see. Here's South Africa, though. South Africa looks a lot like Argentina, doesn't it? And its economy, its real economy, dropped by about 10% last year. And South Africa is an industrial economy. It's a growth nation. It's a growth economy. But like other countries in Africa, although none is as large as South Africa, it's the largest economy in Africa. But its healthcare capabilities and its access to vaccines leaves a lot to be desired. And so you can see that, frankly, South Africa's economy was slowing down anyway, still growing slightly, but slowing down. You can see these trends. When the coronavirus hit, oh boy, it really dropped this economy to a point where it was back in 2012. So it'll be several years until here we are in 2022, and we're nowhere near where South Africa left off. So it'll be sometime, let's see, uh, in probably, let's see, this is 2024. 2024, the IMF expects that South Africa will get back to where it left off. So that's a real challenge economically. What kind of a trading partner will South Africa be? What kind of goods and services from the United States or other countries will South Africa be able to purchase? And so forth. Those are the kinds of questions that we need to ask when we see something like that. So here's just to finish off China. And as you can see, China was the first to realize the problem because that's probably where it began. China doesn't allow other countries, even the World Health Organization, which is biased in China's favor, to come in and examine the laboratories where the coronavirus allegedly occurred in Wuhan. I might add that I've also visited that city, but not when the coronavirus was occurring. It was about 3 years ago. Anyway, there was a slight dip in the growth rate, but you know the reason why China doesn't allow other folks to inspect the laboratories and records, which are maybe being destroyed by this time, is because in all likelihood, if they didn't have something to hide, they would have showed you all those records and allowed for inspections. So since it's not allowing folks to come in and inspect the laboratories, then you kind of wonder what it is they're hiding. Anyway, that's simply my editorializing and just my opinion. But you can see that China has not suffered the declines that these other 9 countries have suffered. So we can draw some conclusions, can't we? I think maybe what we can do is wait for the majority of our conclusions until the next slides, but there certainly are some countries that have been affected more than others. Some have been affected because of the energy industry more than the coronavirus itself. At least that's a suggestion. Japan has suffered quite a bit. India has, although this doesn't show it quite as much until you look at the growth chart, you see the decline in the growth rate. For sure, Argentina has a major problem. And that problem, by the way, seems to be developing. It's not getting better. And the UK is not in real good shape, although it has some very good suppliers of coronavirus vaccine. So we hope that the UK will be able to solve this problem. But right now it has a problem, and there again the US. So with that, I'll stop sharing these charts and try now to bring up for you And I sure hope I got that right. I did. Okay. I'm going to show you three charts now, and we'll discuss them a little bit. But these are the actual onset, the actual occurrences of COVID in several countries, the countries that we just looked at. And I can isolate each country. So I'll start with the US. So there's the US, and we can see that back around March or April in 2020, this thing began. And then it took stair steps. It really got nasty in August. But then around the Christmas holidays, it just really exploded. And the US has had more cases of coronavirus than any other country. However, that may change. You can see that since February, things have gotten much better. There is a possibility that in the fall, we will see another surge from a variant, a new variation of the virus. Now, as we look at these lines, we can see that there were some countries that were experiencing the coronavirus before we had our big surge. Let's take a look at Brazil. Brazil is frankly a problem. And the problem doesn't look like a problem on this chart until you notice something. There's steady growth here. This thing's not getting better, it's getting worse. These are the confirmed cases per million. So this is the rate of infestation or affliction of the population with coronavirus. And we can see that Brazil got started, back in August, July and August, there was a big surge, things quieted down. And then since November, I keep losing this thing, I'm sorry. There we go. So since November, there's been a steady growth of cases. Let me get my notes in front of me so I can do this better. Another one that bears looking at is South Africa. There we go. And we can see that South Africa was one of the early countries to register COVID. There was a big surge in August, things quieted down. And then in about the year end in January, another one. Now, if you look at the far right side of this chart, what do you see? You see what looks like another surge beginning. Argentina does not have good health care and access to vaccines. And so this is something we want to keep our eye on. Argentina does provide a lot of food products to the United States and other countries, and this may make it more difficult for us to obtain those. Let me see here if I can, one other one that is worth looking at, and that's South Africa. And again, we've got these two surges. So South Africa, I'm sorry, was I calling, I think I may have been calling South Africa, Argentina. If I was, I'm sorry. But this is South Africa. And again, it's had two surges, and it looks like it's getting ready for another. And then we have Argentina. And Argentina, no question about it, is really, remember the chart we saw, the economic chart with Argentina's economy dropping 10%? Here we have a pretty good explanation of that. These are major surges, both in October of last year, really the fall of last year, the first of this year, and then more recently, this big surge. And whether or not the decline that we see most recently holds is a strategic issue. But Argentina has really got its hands full right now. So another one that's worth looking at is the UK. Its surge occurred at the same time that the most recent surge occurred in the US. And in fact, it grew just a little. The rate of onset, remember, these are charts of rate of cases per million people and 7-day averages. So the weekly rate, if you will, per million people averaged to be a day. In any event, oh, I'm sorry, it's actually a 7-day average. So it's a weekly average. And we can see that the UK has really had its difficulties. But please look at this chart now, just at the shape of the lines. What do you see that's interesting here? First of all, the US and the UK have pretty much marched in step, but Argentina and Brazil have taken their own way. They're not on the same pattern that the US and the UK are. And Brazil and Argentina are growing in much different ways. We also can see that India has recently had a big surge, and that it has the possibility for another one. Okay, I think that's about all that I wanted to mention about this chart. Let's take a look at the next one. And I have to go by a few things here. There it is. So there we go. So these are the new cases. The chart we just looked at were weekly averages. These are daily confirmed cases. And so it's the 7-day average, I guess, each day. Anyway, what we see is this dramatic difference. Notice that now we have India really showing up in the number of new cases. It's the big one. The U.S. Has certainly had this big surge that we saw on the prior chart, but bigger still has been the surge in India. And again, a question is whether or not we're getting reliable data from India, because India's reputation is to not do a real good job of that. So it's very possible that the problem in India is even bigger than this chart suggests it is. I think that's probably it, although we can take a look at Argentina. And that doesn't look very impressive, even though it turned out to be. Okay, so we'll move on now to the cumulative. So this is the total of cases over time that have been recorded. And again, I want to emphasize have been recorded. As you can see, the US has had the most cases, but we also see that this line is flattening out. We certainly hope it continues to flatten out. But when we look a little bit below that one, the red line for India is scary. Why is it scary? For those of you who are mathematically inclined, you can see something on the nature of a, yeah, maybe I'll do this. But there's a growth curve here that has plenty of room to grow. We can, I can't get this thing to let me, but take a look down here at the bottom of this curve. It takes off, and it looks like it's got a fair amount of room to grow before it flattens out like the US did. See, if we were to compare where India is today to where the US was, we'd probably be down here somewhere, right? And if that's true, then we've got all the rest of that to go. So India is gonna go up quite a bit. Now there's another problem on this chart, and it's Brazil. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a pretty straight line, pretty continuous growth, and no indication of a change in the rate of growth. If this continues, and as we saw in the previous chart, the rate of growth is accelerating somewhat. New cases just keep on going up. So this line is actually bending upward. It's accelerating a bit, but it's very steady and continuous. That means to me that Brazil has a long way to go in this thing. And so we, again, will be looking at Brazil when we examine the industrial and consumer consequences of COVID in these countries. Okay. So here we have some of those other countries, and we don't have too much. You can see the United Kingdom is pretty well. It's still growing, but compared to these other countries, it's a problem for the UK, but maybe not for the rest of the world. But this one, whoops, Argentina has caught my eye because you can see that the acceleration is just beginning. So it is possible that Argentina is down here somewhere at the very beginning of the curve. And if that's true, Argentina will be the next big coronavirus growth country. That's conjectural, and we'll have to see how it goes. But in our next video, we'll be looking at Argentina a little more specifically. So that's a summary of the economic and social consequences of COVID. We can see that the US has been the largest victim of COVID so far, but that Brazil, Argentina, even South Africa are in the process of accelerating. There's been at year end, there were big surges in the U.S. And UK, but now it looks like India and Brazil are our next issues. So India's growth and COVID cases has been quite rapid. And this steady growth in Brazil is something that is a little unlike what we would expect. Normally you expect this, this S-shaped curve. But in Brazil, we've got this straight line going forward. And so that certainly bears monitoring. Something else that would be appropriate is that I end this video now so you can get back to whatever you were doing. And I'm sorry that my throat was giving me so much difficulty that I couldn't explain things as well as I would have liked. But I think that the graphs speak for themselves, and you can certainly figure those out. So with that, I will end this video until we meet again. Goodbye.